We don't have a plan for this exactly, and but there was sort of a couple of topics that come to mind, and we want to share and try to get opinions from everybody here and some thoughts that you might have going forward. We can comment on what we've been doing, of course, and think about that. We're going to spend some time the next couple of weeks trying to sort out. We're going to send out a survey. We encourage everyone to fill that out and get it back to us so that we can benefit from your perspective, which we really need to do. I really had no idea what Ted was going to do and talk about, but it was so fitting to have him at the end here to give us some very broad perspective of culture in Mexico that we really need to hear and think about. So what I may do is pass the mic, and we have a mic that'll be out there, and so we can take questions. But I think to put some framing on this a little bit, a couple of things that emerged. One big thing that seems to be an issue, Chris and I were talking about this, is the affordable housing and the housing issues and how that interrelates to historic preservation. And I mean, to me, it's where the rubber meets the road nowadays. You know, we've got a lot of monuments that have been preserved. We have a lot of special places around New Mexico, Chaco, etc. The Palace of the Governors and all these sorts of places. But our communities and housing, and I think I'm going to pass the mic to Elmo on this, because what they're trying to do in Las Vegas with thinking about the health of community, and they're working on some ideas, and so I'm going to pass it to Elmo to talk a little bit about that.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jake. I think I want to address this issue from a perspective of abandoned properties or endangered properties, empty houses. And I've been thinking about the presentation that was made yesterday by the Historic Santa Fe Foundation and how challenging it is to really try to help people who maybe don't have the means to rehabilitate a historic house and all those issues. So a couple of takeaways that I had from that session, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seemed that the Historic Santa Fe Foundation was working with the city of Santa Fe to identify eligible or attractive possible projects that had some historic value and cultural value. You worked up an inventory, you went through some processing, and you kind of narrowed the list down. And you also had some federal funds, I think HUD and CLG funds. And you identified a couple of property owners that wanted to fix up their houses. But in the end, it seemed to me the federal funding created a whole lot of restrictions and difficulties to actually do a project. So some of the discussion that came out of that, a friend of mine, Hilario Romero, was talking about, well, you have to engage the community. You have to get the community involved in this. You can't just come in from a government or foundation perspective. You kind of have to work at the grassroots level and get the community behind you, is I think the gist of his point. And so, here in Las Vegas, it really kind of raised a couple of red flags for what we're trying to do with our housing projects. I know Lawrence is there with us too. So, thinking about this challenge from our perspective here in Las Vegas, I think one of the issues is you got to raise awareness. You got to let people know that there are a lot of endangered properties. I think we found out couple of years ago that there were probably about 500 abandoned and endangered houses here in Las Vegas. Probably a lot of them of historic and cultural value. And they haven't had any residents in them for a long time. They're abandoned owners. You know, there are all these issues. But I think if we let the public know that, you know, we got to work together and try to create some critical mass so that the community addresses it as an issue. I think that's a start. And I think also we need to do a little bit of master planning behind it. I think of our Distrito de las Escuelas, which is our oldest neighborhood, and it's just south of the plaza. It's on Santa Fe Trail. It's got a lot of abandoned properties and some empty lots. And so I think a bit of master planning around that can help us. So anyway, I'll wrap up here. But, thank you for that discussion yesterday from Santa Fe. I think we're all trying to help each other on this issue.
Thank you. I don't know, I'm not intending to be the moderator, but I guess it sort of falls to me. I think in thinking about that concept, one thing that occurs to me is that, and being a Santa Fe person, I'm from Santa Fe now, and one of the problems that you're facing, that we're facing in Santa Fe, is that the community part of those areas and those houses is really not so much in existence. So that idea of doing grassroots there is very difficult and challenging. Whereas I think in a place like Las Vegas, you know, there's a lot of local people living in that area. And I haven't myself gone to the neighbors' houses. I certainly wouldn't even dare to do it because I'm not from here. But I think the neighbors know about those places. And oh yeah, such and such was there. That's a cousin of mine or whatever. So you gotta work in that environment to get that going, in my opinion. I wonder if Florence wants to make any comment about that.
So, you know, we have to have a multi-sided approach to this. Yes, we need to have community input and look at planning when it comes to those properties that are can't be reached through direct approach by looking at what buildings in our community are red tagged and available right now. So we have to look short-term and long-term when it comes to the housing, because some of them are available right now. They've been vacant for years, or we just lost some. We lost a whole Adobe Road section right next to the plaza. And we have to determine what that vacant land is going to happen. Is it going to be a parking lot? Then we lose the availability of possible housing that can go right next to our commercial district. It was housing. People lived there. And I actually have a house right next to that lot that I was afraid that was going to be burned, but now it's vacant. And I hear it's going to be a parking lot. So do we need more parking? When I see other parking areas completely vacant that are right next to the plaza. So those are the two. We have to make some priorities of what things are available right now and what we could do with those. We just lost another commercial site on Railroad District. They felt the structure was weak and was torn down. And I'm on the design review board right now, and I look at the ordinance that we have in effect, and we need to address the ordinance when it comes to tearing down a building, that it needs to go through a historical review. Right now, we have an acequia that we had pipeline without SHPO getting a review, a historical review of that pipeline, where we had photos, we had parcentes, how many parcentes were on the acequia madre, and we could actually do a review of, I'm all for a pipeline, it saves water. But let's do the review. Let's do our homework first of getting all that so that we can tell our kids, these are the parcentes that originally used the acequia madre, these are the things that have to, same thing with housing. We need to take those structures, and we went through, and I could count 10, 15 housing that have been vacant in my lifetime that are still standing that we need to do something with. And so some of them can be revived, and adobe is an affordable structure that we can afford. We've proven that by doing a model house at Luna Community College. We know that we can put it as affordable housing.
Maybe I'll pass this to Chris to just comment generally on this idea, well, specifically, actually.
I've lived next to a vacant house for nearly 10 years in Albuquerque, in a late 1940s Heights suburbs of Albuquerque. And the original owner, who died 10 years ago, kind of left hard feelings in the family and a mess, and there wasn't a good transition. And I think in many cases that's behind the issue. But the other thing is our municipalities, and maybe there needs to be state legislation, haven't really gotten to the bottom of what the issues are, because this particular house next to us is in some kind of mortgage limbo, and nobody, it's not being used. Nobody's sorting it out. All the neighbors around are concerned. We've tried to get the city to work with us. And I would say that among all the neighbors, at least once a month, somebody who makes their living buying, vacant houses and auction houses, refurbishing them and selling them, comes by. How can I get a hold of this? How can I get this back in circulation? So my gut feeling is that there are lots of issues, but one is our political leadership in municipalities and in the state need to step up to the table and really get to the basis of the ownership and mortgage issues, and catalyze things to get housing stock back in use.
Before turning this over to Michele, just picking up on that, we tried to get the ROC program to come and present, but he was too busy he was tied up. But the ROC program, I want to make everybody aware that the state of New Mexico in 2023 launched this idea of Restore Our Communities, called the ROC program. They funded it in 2024 to the tune of $4 million. And they started these projects, and it's a financial thing through the Housing Authority, basically. But the whole idea was to find vacant houses in communities and then fund those efforts to get those back into making usable living spaces. And part of the idea is real simple. Housing is a big need, and you got a lot of buildings that are empty, put them back into service. So, I've been looking at this ROC program, and I think it needs some tweaking. And so the idea of going to the legislature, we need people to do that. We need to get in front of them and find out who the leaders are that put those legislative pieces together, and get in and talk to them about keeping that program alive and adapting and changing for the way it could really work much better. But I do want to turn this over to Michele from the SHPO's point of view about all this kind of thing.
Well, I don't think that, I think that the issue of vacant houses isn't isolated. So I live in Midtown Santa Fe, and within a mile, there are at least several houses that are vacant. And I know the city of Santa Fe is looking at trying to address those problems. They call them nuisance properties because they're, they have abandoned cars, weeds, and so they're trying to address that issue and figure out who owns them, but it can be really hard. From the SHPO's point of view, there's not a whole lot we can do other than to provide support for, any surveys, programs that you might have that could use certified local government grants. If you need us to come talk to your community about tax credits or listing, properties on the state or national register. I mean, we're here to help.
I think it's really great, and what she said about listing on the national register, the one criteria is 50 years. So we're in 2025, so what does that mean? Anything built before 1975? Well, so, it's 1950s. and all those developments from 1950s after the war. Maybe those are historic districts now. It's the ones that are intact and have a lot of integrity. I live in one of those neighborhoods, Casa Alegre in Santa Fe. To me, it's kind of a special place. So we're not listed or anything like that. But along the Cerrillos corridor, and we got to start thinking about this because it's under threat. Marriott Hotel wants to put a big thing right there, 4 stories high. You drive up Cerrillos, it's all 1 story. You see the mountains in front of you. That hotel goes up, forget it. It's like the domino effect or something. So here, let's have some comments from the audience.
Oh, click the button. Andrew Stone. Push it up and it goes green.
I had a question about the ROC program. They said they identified 12,000 abandoned homes in New Mexico. Does anybody here know anybody who's done it and gotten money for it or anything?
Yeah. They've had several projects in Albuquerque. 4. I'm not familiar with those projects, but I have been up in Raton. And Raton is doing 2 buildings with the ROC program right now. And they're in the midst of it. They haven't concluded any of that work. But I went to see the work, and they're very enthusiastic about it. But it's challenging because the funding is a little bit limited, and it has a cap. And so there's this kind of level of what you have to fit into. But the whole idea is affordability, and it's not gentrification, it's the opposite that. So it's controlled through easements from the owner to the next owner to the next owner. All a great idea, but since it's just started, that's why I'm saying we have to watch it, and we have to get to the legislature and say what's working, what's not working. Because these kind of things can die on the vine. And we don't want that program dying on the vine because somebody in the legislature woke up and saw this and said, let's do this. God knows how they dreamed it up, but more power to them. And now it needs, follow-up. Okay.
I think one of the problems that we were running into, I'm with the city of Albuquerque, the Historic Preservation Unit in the Planning Department. And when we were looking at some of these fundings, there were a lot of ARPA funds that were also there for restoration. And the problem was I was trying to talk with them so that in historic areas, they would put some review, some sort of a guideline, so that even though they have these monies to restore these properties, they can do a real butcher job to get it so that it's inhabitable, but all the character and all that sort of community identity goes out the window because they look for the cheapest, fastest way to do these restorations. And so they were supposed to put, like a guideline so it would come for historic review. Never happened. They just sort of we just gave the money away. We didn't want to bother with it anymore. So I think that's one of the things that needs to go with these programs is that if you're looking at restoration of communities that are old communities that have old buildings, there needs to be some way that you can, not that we're going to ask for tax credits because that may be an expensive way to do it, but at least a way that's complementary and compatible with the historic architecture. And that is really slipping through all of these funding mechanisms.
I think related to your question,
So forgive me because I'm kind of new, obviously. I'm going to be hopefully a certified Adobe home builder under Jake and Ernesto at the end of the semester. But is there a program, for example, in Albuquerque, we have LandLink, where there's future farmers that want to farm and people who own current farms, and they can go to this website and see where the needs in the community are. I'm not a website developer and wouldn't know how to do it, but is there a program for that? Maybe that we could create those resources of the houses that are abandoned, the builders who want to build, and that would be a network over the state of New Mexico, and people can help the funding and the resources available.
We don't have anything in Albuquerque.
can you answer that?
We don't have anything like, I mean, of course, within the city of Albuquerque proper, there's not really farmland, agricultural, it would be out in the county. But we don't have any programs that work with that, certainly not within the city of Albuquerque.
Or like the Adobe building and the
Yeah, we're just trying to keep them from tearing them down.
You know, I think this kind of thing is very, the kind of idea that we need to articulate to take to the legislature, because I don't think it exists. They've done a great thing of starting this program, but it needs development. It needs to incorporate all these kind of ideas from the community. So thank you for that.
Yes, I'm curious from the standpoint of property rights prevailing throughout the nation, hopefully, aside from eminent domain, where the government can confiscate your property and give you fair price for it, supposedly, out of the warehouse of abandoned properties, how many out of those thousands of properties does the issue begin with clear title and being able to give title to a public entity or a private individual who would like to rehabilitate that property? That's how can a legislature trample on property rights of a family that refuses to wade through and resolve the conflicts that are preventing that property from being restored through giving it to another person, ownership issues?
I'm going to make one comment about that. This is America, where property ownership is sacrosanct, you know. But so it's not like Europe, where in France they tell you what you can do. We're not going to get there in America. But having said that, this kind of thing is going on in Vegas. The red tags are going up.
The one thing that I'm all for property ownership, but when it infringes on your neighbor, where your property is endangering because the roofs are so close and it's starting to damage the other person's private property, then something has to happen. Well, you know, because my advice would be now you have to go after that property owner and say, hey, you're starting to damage my home and we need you to do something with it. And if they fail to do so, then that goes into another thing. Some of these properties that we're talking about, red tag, become a fire hazard to their neighbor. And that's when we step in and say, hey, you got to do something. You've got to fix your property or something's going to happen.
Yeah, I want to bring in another issue that you're probably coming to later, and that is how does this conference, this organization go forward? And whether it's a year or 2 years, I'll just observe there are some bedrocks of the conference that you're going to want to have every year. We're going to want to have every year. One is introduction to things like the Main Street program, the National Register, and so forth. Another is the great success stories, you know, because people have to make alliances. We see how many years and how many players, and people, you know, need to celebrate that. But I wonder if the group could pick out one major issue going into each conference, and I think this is a really compelling one. Point toward that, turn one day of the conference into a focus on that issue, identify the people, in this case in the state legislature, maybe in different cities, that are trying to address it, and see if the organization, you know, with the expertise in renovation of buildings and working with communities and building partnerships, if we could foster a dialogue that could help the legislature move towards addressing this.
Very good point.
I just wanted to say something. Jake, didn't it take about 4 years for you in Chimayo for you to get all of the private owners to agree to the restoration of that little house that you all did on the plaza in Chimayo? I mean, it took years, I know it did.
Well, in that particular case, we didn't. That's a good example of the complexity of a community where you have close-knit community owned by many different people with many different interests. And what we realized there, and it had been tried at Chimayo several times before to restore that plaza in a global way. It always failed because it only takes one individual in a community to put up their hands and say, stop. And what we realized is you've got to take one house, one property in the neighborhood. It's got to be a showplace. And I don't mean that in a way that it's got to, wow, look at that, look what happened. Look at that little house that got restored. And so it's the model. And you have to believe that that works because that's possible. The global thing is really difficult. Having said that, we got to work on the legislature to get them to be aware of the things that they can do to kind of promote that.
I think another aspect of this that I think I'm coming around to is that we need a whole lot of capacity. We need a whole lot of organizational capacity in our communities to take this on. I can tell you that our community foundation is not in the housing business, but we need to probably spin off a nonprofit that is dedicated to a lot of these issues. So I think that's another part of it is how do we build up our capacity to do this work.
I just wanted to say one of the biggest problems with abandoned property, where's that sound coming from? One of the biggest problems, certainly in Albuquerque, I don't know about in the smaller towns, are absentee property owners. They've either inherited it, they've moved away, they may or may not know it's there. It sits there, the addresses we have aren't valid. They go to a dead letter box, some trust that doesn't exist. Somebody, you know, eventually somebody will find that everybody is dead and they're able to get hold of a property, but by then it is in very bad shape. Or if we do get in touch with them, they're like, yeah, we'll come and do something until it's burned down or something like that. We lose a lot of properties. The property owner still owns it, but it's a vacant lot now. So it's not that it's trying to find owners, you know, to either help them with their property or to buy their property from them. But if we can't figure out who even owns it, nobody even claims it, it's very difficult. And we have a lot of that in Albuquerque, certainly in the older neighborhoods.
Hi, today most of us have really learned about the importance of education and what fun it is. And some of us, myself included, maybe especially me, I have found out that I'm interested in things that 10 years ago I thought, what? And so I got to thinking that I like what Mr. Wilson was saying about the idea of a focus in the future. That would be kind of a fun thing. And if we knew about it ahead of time, Jake, we would be able to be prepared. And I think that would be fun. The other thing is education. I was thinking, I went down in Las Cruces last weekend, many of you were there, and I sat in on how they're going to change the books for the 4th graders and the 7th graders and the 9th graders. And I gave them my card, and they said, well, contact us because maybe you can help us with the bibliography. Retired librarians get used all the time. But because I have a contact, what I'd like to do is suggest that in each of those books, at appropriate levels, an introduction to preservation and the history of architecture and culture could be all combined. And I think they would be willing to do that. So that's an idea I had. I like thinking outside of the box, but you know, good things come in boxes.
I wonder if I could follow up on that. Excuse me, I'm an anthropologist, so I'm going to get a little philosophical. Our theme, speaking of themes, for this one is preserve your future. And I'd like to hear from the panel, given the last several days, what does that mean to us now? It's not just preserving the past. What does it mean to preserve the future?
That's a great question. We came up with that concept in committee up here in Vegas where we got together. Well, at that time we were meeting out at Luna at the community college where some of this got a gestation going. And we were throwing around concepts. Elmo was there, Lawrence was there, the president of the college was very active. A few other people I can't think of at the moment, but what we were contemplating was idea that preservation needs to respond to the current and future needs of where we're at, and not just focus on restoring past pieces of history, but using that knowledge of history and culture going forward to adapt it to the new world and bring things around. And I think, you know, it's like, I sometimes think this right here is so great, but it's our big enemy. I mean, the kids are stuck. Well, we got to make use of that. You know, we don't have a choice. It's here. You can't get rid of this thing. So, like I was thinking about this when Ted was talking, you know, and I'm sure tribal issues have this, it's like maybe language can come through here to them, you know, the youth. But I like this idea of youth in the community colleges where we're like focusing a lot of attention to do that.
You know, there was a comment made about looking at vacant properties. The biggest thing is that we don't know all the vacant properties in Las Vegas are. We need to identify them and probably create a picture and say, what do we want to do with this picture for the future? Because we can identify all of them, and I think we haven't even, I have no idea. I was told by one of the city officials that there are 500 buildings in Las Vegas that do not have running water. And I showed you the picture of the one that my brother got. There was no running water there for 20 years. And I took Jacob there, all of the electrical outlets were outdated. They were 20 years old. So if we can identify all these properties and get a picture, then we can probably look at what we want to do this in the future. So I think that's one of the things that we probably need to do first.
I want to try to answer that challenging question somewhat in a material way. So one thing that I think about is when we start to build houses here, hopefully soon, are we going to be able to match the quality of our historic architecture? You know, I don't think we want to build a crappy house next to a beautiful Queen Anne house. And so to me, that some of the discussion yesterday at Beverly Spears talking about, you know, is Adobe still feasible? Can we still build out of Adobe? Can we still build out of, you know, historic materials, stone, brick, timber? And so to me, if we can build real quality housing, I think that to me will create a standard that moves us into the future.
You know, first of all, let's remember that historic preservation, for all its strengths, has certain operative concepts that actually break ongoing tradition. You know, they tend to, and they have, you know, there are reasons for them, but the 50-year cutoff for most designations, you know, it breaks the continuity of tradition. Remember, the National Register went into place and the Secretary of Interior's guidelines were framed at the height of modernism within the architecture profession. And so that injunction in the Secretary of Interior standards of additions should not pretend to be part of the historic building. They should be clearly of the present. Well, that assumes, as modernists did, that regional and historical traditions were false. They should be interrupted. And I think, you know, we need to think about how our work, how our culture continues. The word tradition itself, the modernist and cosmopolitan conception of tradition, is that it's something old-fashioned and frozen. As Raymond Williams showed in his great book, Key Words, that's a recent definition of tradition. The original definition of tradition could mean translation or transmission. It was the process of culture being carried on through our lived experience, our lives. I mean, I thought Ted's talk was wonderful. In a sense, that was an indigenous land acknowledgement with deep substance. We started our programs with brief ones, but that really gave us an insight. And if I understood him, at one point he said there are cycles of experience leading to elevating group consciousness. That's a similar idea about this is lived experience. It's not frozen. It flows through our experiences. The articulation and emergence of querencia, articulating a concept of community groundedness over time was always there, but it's in the last 10 or 15 years that's really been elevated. I even would point to the great feminist Lucy Lepard's book, The Lure of the Local, in which she advocates for those of us that didn't grow up in a grounded situation, the idea of sequential or serial groundedness. You move someplace, you get yourself grounded, you educate yourself, and you find common cause with the other people that live in that area. So those are my, perhaps not entirely articulate, thoughts.
I want to ask Michele about this, to think about this for a second, because, the Secretary of Standards get applied by Michele, and that's her responsibility. And I go out in the community, and sometimes I'll say to people, get this on the register. Oh my God, no. No, I'm not doing that. They're going to tell me what to do. They're going to be controlling what we do. We don't want to be on that national register. And I try to argue with them and say, wait a minute. So I need Michele to comment on, because the flexibility that she has, and I don't know how much flexibility you have, but I think you have a great deal of flexibility. But comment on Secretary Sanders.
Oh, well, there's actually a lot of flexibility, and one of the sessions yesterday, one of the camp sessions, they were talking about alternative material, and within the city of Denver, at the local level, they have started making some changes to their design guidelines and focusing on things that were more important than just historic windows, because they were finding themselves spending a lot of energy and time trying to save all the windows, all the historic windows, that they, started looking at their guidelines a little differently. So, I think there's several things here that, at the state level, we apply the Secretary of Interior's guidelines when somebody's using federal money or state money on property. But at the local level, you're going to have to follow your local design ordinance. And so, we don't get involved at the local level because that's what the local community is charged with. But for private property owners, we've always said you can do what you want to do, even if your house is on the National Register. So that's the thing that sometimes we have to educate people on. And, I had an email last week where somebody wanted us to get involved in a dispute just because the property was listed on the National Register. Sorry, we can't do that. But I think there's a lot of flexibility, at the local level, and also within the Secretary of Interior's guideline, because we follow the treatment for rehabilitation the most, and there is a lot of flexibility within that.
Our design review guidelines on property to do renovation is very flexible. They were talking about the Stanton property. They were using synthetic materials to change the tiles on the roof. We have a lot of that same flexibility. And even it's when new construction comes and you're standing on a vacant lot next to a Victorian home or something like that, that's when we say, bring us something that is in line with the historical district. And there's a lot of ways you can accomplish that, because there are your primary houses, but then you have the houses that fit within that, and you can do a lot of things to fit within a historical district without breaking the bank, having to do a large Victorian home. And so I just think that there is a lot of flexibility by becoming on the historical registry.
Hi, can I make a comment before you guys get too far back here? Just piggybacking off of what Elmo and Chris were saying about rebuilding here in Las Vegas and kind of honoring the quality of the materials and the form and kind of the challenges that come with that. And I think it's really important to bring into this dialogue the building code, because the building code, it gets updated every couple of years. And with every iteration of the building code, we lose the ability to build traditionally. And a lot of these efforts are in, good, they have good, objectives. They want to, increase livability for people. They want to reduce energy costs. They want to ensure that, homes are safe and structurally sound. And I definitely agree with all of that. But when our insulation requirements mean that we can no longer build with 2x12s, that's a problem. When our framers have lost the ability to do carpentry because they're doing pre-manufactured trusses, we're losing a continuity of building tradition, and we're changing the way our housing forms look, because we're requiring them to be modified to meet insulation requirements and new building technologies. So I think, we need to kind of be aware of all of these systems that are in place and how they affect our built environment, because as architects, it's a very challenging thing when we're trying to work in historic districts and to retrofit, remodel, or build because of the building codes. So I just wanted to put that out there. And then a little shameless quick plug for New Mexico Main Streets conferences. We have 2 conferences coming up, and the public and the community is always welcome to our conferences. We do one conference a year that is in one of our local Main Street communities. This year it's in Alamogordo. It will be in 2 weeks, October 15th through 17th. So if you're in that area or can get there, our registration fees are very reasonable. It's about $35 to attend. And then our winter conference this year is in Albuquerque. Let's see, the dates are the 18th through the 20th of February. So please check our website for further information on how to register and schedules of events. And if you're really interested in getting more involved or learning more about Main Street, the national conference this year is in Tulsa in April, and that's pretty easy and affordable for us to get to from New Mexico. So thank you.
We really just have a few more minutes. Oh, let's take another question.
I just have a statement. I totally disagree that the problem is building codes. You just got to be a little creative in how you design and select materials, but the codes are there for the benefit of society, and the reality is things cost more. So yes, we might have to have alternative materials and systems, but the problem is not the codes. It's the cost of materials and labor and just land and all that we are having to deal with.
Yeah, thank you for that, because the codes are health and safety, basically. So it's very important to think about that. We don't have a few minutes left, and I've got a couple. Oh, go ahead.
Hey, Jake. I just wanted to mention something. This organization I found out about called, let's see, Resilient Southwest. And they are working in Flagstaff, Phoenix, a bunch of places in Arizona, Las Cruces and Albuquerque, and I think the county of Santa Fe might be even part of it. But it's a collaborative effort where they're by local jurisdictions, state agencies, and education and training organizations. But what they're trying to do is look for more adaptive code for the Southwest, and they're hoping that a lot of these municipalities and organizations would adapt it. And it's considering a lot of, I went to one of, you can go and attend their forums and sign up for their emails. And they're looking at cultural sensitivity as well as the kind of gritty side and the rules-based side of it. So, and then they're looking at people building in rural areas too, and affordability is one of the big things. And then one other thing I want to say too, we talked a lot today about like housing, but I'm really interested in the project you're doing, and maybe that's a follow-up talk later on, but rebuilding historic houses with affordability and putting people in the houses. So I think sometimes when you rebuild them, then the property values go up and then they become no longer affordable anymore. So I think that's one thing too, we gotta figure out that intersection and how to try and keep the houses affordable as we start to redo them too. But that's all, I just wanted to bring that up too, because I thought this organization was really interesting.
So one more question, we'll have to close this out, or one more comment question, right here.
The Eaton fire in California, there's a group of architects, planners, apparently, that have gotten together to create homes that are historic looking in design, to kind of meld with what the community used to be. And these plans apparently, I'm not sure if they have pre-approval by code compliance. So the issues in rebuilding, I think, have been addressed by this group of individuals that have done these beautiful designs of Victorian homes, cottages, bungalows, and you know, and you used to be able to buy kit homes through Sears, I think, but I think they're kind of developing this model on that idea. So there might be people that have already kind of addressed some of the issues of beauty and traditional styles being made available and more economical. So that's maybe a place to look for some solutions.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. I think there's a lot of models that we can go to. We're really out of time, and a couple of announcements to make, but one thing I'd like to say is that there's a lot of issues and a lot of commentary that we're not getting to, and there's a lot of people that aren't here. And so going forward, there's a couple of things we're thinking about. And maybe give a show of hands, should we consider continuing these conferences in the future? Right now we're thinking every other year. But, you know, just to make sure, we're gonna get a survey out. No, absolutely not. We at least want to give Earth USA a chance every other year. They do it every other year, so we'll be in between there, because Earth USA puts on a great conference. And so far as I'm concerned, and this, you know, the problem I have, I'm stuck with Adobe. And Earth USA, I mean, that's New Mexico, so it's a broken record. But the other thing I was thinking about is we really have a challenge going forward to create a space on the internet, Preserve New Mexico website or whatever, where we can have continual dialogue and communication coming in, so that going forward we can make sure we get input from everybody. We haven't figured out how to do that, but we're going to be working on some of these ideas. So if there's any kind of a closing comment, I have one last closing comment, but
well, we've got to thank the people who put this on, you know, HPV, Cornerstones, you know, all of our organizations making the program. You know, incredible. Thank you so much for reviving this.
Well, that's great. It's a dream come true for us. And the one thanks I want to give, of course, everybody that participated. I'm so happy you came because you made the conference. At one point, we had 60 people signed up. We thought, oh God. But then suddenly it happened and we got close to 200 here, maybe even more when the students walked in. But from my point of view and being one of the organizers, I got to say, it's Robin Jones here. Put all this together, basically, and so big thanks to Robin. Thank you.
And I do get the final word.
Yes.
And that no just kind of burst out of me, sorry. 3 things. We will do evaluation forms. We will email them to you because we wanted to base them a little bit on the discussions we've been hearing throughout these last 3 days. Also, we didn't want you sitting here scribbling, very nice, thank you, thanks, that was it. We want you to go home and think about it for a little bit, and give us a measured response, and this will guide us in the future for the conference in 2027.